Imagine, a night so still it feels like the world itself has forgotten to breathe. Above a lake born of drowned cities, a formation of lights hovers, silent and motionless, as if stitched into the fabric of the sky. The water reflects nothing. The animals fall quiet. Radios hiss with static. Time stumbles. And for a few eternal minutes, the laws of reality crack, revealing something not meant to be seen. Something watching back. Something waiting. And just like that, it vanishes. No sound. No explanation. Only silence, and the heavy, inescapable question that will haunt a town for decades. Don't forget to like and share this story with your friends or closest family members to help spread awareness and caution through storytelling. Now let's continue with the story. The summer of 2010 in eastern China was unremarkably humid, even by the standards of July. Tourists still flocked to the calm waters of Qiandao Lake, a sprawling body of sapphire water punctuated by over 1,000 tree-covered islands. Beneath those islands lay the forgotten ruins of ancient towns, submerged to make way for a dam in the 50s. Locals often joked that the spirits below still stirred now and then, but in Chunnan County jokes like that came with a cautious smile. On the 10th of July, a day after international headlines covered the mysterious airspace shutdown over Hangzhou, no one expected that a second, quieter incident would unfold, not above a bustling airport, but over the isolated mirror of Qiandao. Liang Chen had lived by the lake all his life. At 68, he had retired from his teaching job and spent his evenings documenting stars with an old telescope and a rusted compass he had used since the 70s. He was a man of science, of logic, and of long, quiet nights beneath an endless sky. That night he brought his 2 grandchildren, Yingyu, aged 9, and Bo, aged 12, to Meifeng Island. They had taken the family boat out just before sunset, planning to stargaze and tell stories away from the city's noise. As twilight settled and the temperature dropped, Liang marked constellations in his notebook and adjusted the dials on his portable radio. At exactly 9:46, the compass needle began to twitch. Liang didn't notice it at first. He was too focused on tuning the static from the radio. But Bo leaned in, frowning. "Grandpa, why is your compass spinning?" Liang looked down. The needle shivered, turned full circle, then locked in place, not pointing north, but toward the center of the lake. He tapped the glass. Nothing. The needle refused to correct itself. Then came the lights. Above the lake center, 6 amber orbs appeared without warning. They formed a perfect arc like a bridge built of stars. Not one flickered. Not one moved. They hung there, impossibly still. "What is that?" Yingyu whispered. Liang couldn't answer. His radio let out a high-pitched tone, soft at first, then rising into a whine that cut through the air like a blade. The boat rocked slightly, though the water remained calm. In the distance, other boats noticed too. Fishermen stood frozen, their nets slack in their hands. A dog on the northern shore began howling uncontrollably, then stopped. The lights remained, cold, silent, and seemingly watching. Then, just as suddenly, they blinked out, one by one, moving from left to right in a smooth, unnatural rhythm. The sky returned to darkness. The compass needle lay still. The radio fell silent. And the frogs, the crickets, the wind, all returned at once, as if someone had released a giant pause button on reality. For the rest of the night, Liang didn't speak. His grandchildren clung to his arms. He guided the boat home, but his eyes never left the sky. The next morning, no reports made the news. No government vehicles came. No journalists asked questions. But those who were there remembered. The fishermen told their families. A couple on a honeymoon snapped a blurry photo they would later find missing from their device. An elderly painter tried to recreate the scene but was later hospitalized after waking up screaming from what he called a soundless thunder in his dreams. Liang returned to the lake alone a week later. He set his compass on a rock and waited. It never moved again. That same month, a team from Zhejiang University came through Chunnan, asking questions, collecting air samples, and refusing to explain why. No official statement was ever released. No data was ever published. But those who saw it know. The lake remembers. And so do the lights. The heat lingered in Chunnan like an illness. Days after the strange lights vanished over Qiandao Lake, an uneasy stillness settled over the region. Locals continued with their lives, markets bustled, boats drifted, children played, but beneath the surface, whispers spread like slow-burning embers. Something had happened. something no one could name but no one could forget. 3 days after the event, a white van bearing no license plate rolled into town before dawn. Inside were 4 researchers from Zhejiang University, their arrival unannounced. They claimed they were part of an upper atmospheric ionization study. Their leader, a thin, sharp-eyed man in his late 30s named Dr. Fan Lihua, wore an expression that mixed curiosity with calculation. He asked few questions, but his team recorded everything. They set up base in an unused tea processing facility near the southern docks. Locals watched them with narrowed eyes, unsure if they were scientists or something else entirely. The team moved quickly, collecting soil, water, and air samples. They erected temporary antennas along the western ridge and deployed strange drones shaped like black, wingless insects that hovered silently over the lake at night. No one was told why they had come. No one was told when they would leave. At the heart of their activity was a narrow stretch of water between Meifeng Island and the partially submerged ruins of Shicheng, the ancient lion city hidden beneath the lake's surface. Sonar scans revealed a pocket of ionized gas trapped just meters above the waterline, impossible by natural standards. The readings pulsed every 70 seconds, fluctuating in strength like a slow, artificial heartbeat. Dr. Fan stared at the data with a quiet intensity. "This is not atmospheric," he murmured one night, not knowing a technician behind him overheard. On the 5th night, something happened. At 2:14 in the morning, the drone feed cut out. Every antenna in the grid spiked, then failed. Backup batteries drained instantly. Then silence. The team rushed to the lake's edge. The water was dead calm. No wind. No sound. And hanging directly above the scan site again were the lights. But this time only 3. They glowed fainter than before, as though weakened or observing from a distance. Dr. Fan's assistant, Luo Mei, began to film, her hands trembling. The lights slowly rotated in a triangle, completing one full circle in 12 seconds. Then again. Then a 3rd time. On the 4th rotation, the central light winked out. Mei gasped. The remaining 2 began to descend. Panic surged. The researchers fled, abandoning equipment. Mei dropped the camera. The footage would later be corrupted, saved only as a 2-second clip of blurred orange with a rising frequency hum in the background. By sunrise, the research site was emptied. Every drone, antenna, and monitor was gone. The team left town by noon, saying nothing to anyone. Not even to the local official who approved their visit. When asked for a report, Zhejiang University replied with a single line, "No notable data collected." But Liang Chen heard what others didn't. In the nights that followed, he began to notice new patterns in the lake's behavior. Fish no longer gathered near the island. Birds refused to nest in the trees above. The moon's reflection warped slightly near the center, as if the water itself were trying to hide something beneath it. He returned to the rock where he left his compass. Still unmoving. Still pointing toward that same invisible center. Later that week, a local child went missing for several hours, found safe but silent on the northern shore, clutching his ears. When asked what he heard, he only whispered, "The lake was speaking." And then he refused to speak again. Liang began writing everything down. He mapped the light's appearance, the magnetic readings, the intervals between events. His old training as a teacher returned, data, patterns, logic. But nothing added up. There were no equations for this. No theory that could hold its shape in the face of what they saw. Only silence. And every night, the same thought circled in his mind like the lights above. They are not gone. They are watching. Weeks passed, but the lake did not forget. Nor did Liang Chen. By early August, the skies over Qiandao Lake remained clear, but the people living near its shores could feel something had shifted. Tourists still arrived, but fewer now. Locals spoke in softer voices. Strange things had started to happen, subtle at first, then undeniably wrong. Boats lost power near Meifeng Island. Compasses turned unreliable within a 10-kilometer radius. At night, dogs barked toward the lake with teeth bared, then whimpered and retreated without cause. And deep in the water, something began to hum. It started as a vibration, so faint that only the most still moments could catch it. Then came the low-frequency tone, detectable only through hydrophones, vibrating like a massive engine buried under the ruins of Shicheng. Divers who had once explored the submerged city refused to return. The water, they claimed, felt too heavy. One diver, a man named Wei Jun, had led recreational tours of the ruins for over a decade. On the evening of August 12th, he entered the water for what would be his final descent. He wore a body camera synced to a surface monitor. Visibility was good, the moon full. The team on the boat followed his slow descent as he passed through the city's silent streets, ghostly walls covered in algae and silt. 22 minutes into the dive, the screen flickered. Wei's breathing grew shallow. Then on the feed a shadow moved. No shape. No mass. Just the absence of light, gliding past the stone archways like smoke beneath the water. "Wei," the operator called. "Are you seeing this?" Wei didn't respond. The signal cut to black. The boat pulled him up manually. They found him unconscious, mask shattered, regulator intact but untouched. His eyes were open, but unfocused, unblinking. For hours he mumbled only one word. Rhythms. He survived. But he never dove again. Word reached Liang Chen within days. He added Wei's name to his growing logbook. But something about this latest event disturbed him deeper than the rest. The sound. He had heard it too, faintly, in the early hours of August 16th. A low, resonant frequency that made the windows tremble. No storm followed. No wind stirred. Just the tone, humming like a buried bell beneath the water. He reached out to an old friend, Professor Yan Wuqing, an expert in underwater acoustics at Shanghai Ocean University. He had no interest in tales of lights, but the frequency samples Liang sent intrigued him. "This is not marine life," Yan said after analyzing the file. "It's structured, repeating every 11 seconds but never identical. Organic variation, but mechanical precision. That's not nature. That's design." He requested more recordings. 2 days later, Yan stopped responding. No emails. No calls. Liang received one final message, time-stamped at 2:17 a.m., delivered via encrypted attachment with no subject line. Inside was a single file. Its title was an equation. One Liang hadn't seen since university. The Schrödinger equation. But instead of variables and constants, the values had been replaced with binary code. Liang sat awake that night, trying to interpret it. Hours passed and the code resolved into a series of time-stamped coordinates, all pointing to the lake. One matched the precise location where Wei Jun's camera had gone dark. Another pointed to the very center of Meifeng Island. And the final set, marked with tomorrow's date, pointed not to land or water, but the air above. Liang began packing his things. Notebooks. Compass. A camera. 2 hydrophones. 1 old field recorder. He did not tell his family where he was going. That night, as the moon rose over Qiandao Lake, a new pulse began, quieter than before but deeper. The lake did not shimmer. It absorbed the moonlight like velvet. And in the stillness, a thought whispered across the surface of the water, though no one could say from where. The morning of August 17th arrived quietly, as if the sun itself had forgotten how to rise. Qiandao Lake lay still under a silver haze. The wind refused to stir. Liang Chen stood on Meifeng Island, where the final coordinate had led him, holding his rusted compass and an old military field scope that had belonged to his father. The number, latitude, longitude, and elevation placed the final marker exactly 270 meters above the island in thin air. Not on the water. Not in the ruins. The sky. He stared upward. There was nothing. And yet something felt there. The air tasted metallic, like the edge of a storm that hadn't yet begun. Around him, insects had gone silent. The birds too. His breath echoed in his own ears. He activated his hydrophones, dipping them into the shallows of the lake's edge. The water responded instantly. The hum had changed. No longer low and slow, it now carried a pattern, 3 pulses, a pause, then 2 shorter ones. Liang grabbed his notebook, flipping through the pages where he charted previous frequencies. This sequence was new. Deliberate. Intentional. He adjusted the field scope, setting it to zoom at the elevation point above the tree line. The glass trembled. Something shimmered in the sky. Not a solid object. Not visible. But the distortion was unmistakable, like heat rising off pavement, except colder, concentrated, and moving against the wind. He recorded what he could, speaking softly into the field mic. August 17. 9:43. Elevation point is accurate. Atmospheric disruption visible. Object is phasing in and out. Not optical, this is spatial compression. Possibly gravitational. As he spoke, a flock of birds burst from the tree-line, screeching in panic. Liang flinched, instinctively ducking. The air above him rippled, and for a split second he saw it. A massive cylindrical structure, motionless, humming softly, suspended in the air without propulsion. It was black but not reflective. Its surface seemed to absorb the light, not bounce it back. No windows. No markings. Just a shape, ancient and unfamiliar. Then it was gone again, lost to the shimmer. He stood frozen. A voice crackled through his radio, not in Mandarin, not in any language he recognized. But the tone, it felt like speech. Something calm, steady, not hostile. Just aware. Then a second voice joined it. This one closer. Inside the mic. Inside his ears. He staggered back. The compass began spinning again. From the far end of the island, a low hum began to rise, the same pulse sequence from earlier. The trees themselves began to shake. And then came the pressure. Liang dropped to one knee. His vision blurred. It felt as though gravity itself had shifted, pulling sideways instead of down. His camera lens cracked from the force. Blood trickled from his nose. Then silence. Just as before. Everything returned to stillness. The compass lay motionless. The air resumed its weight. But Liang was no longer alone. A figure stood across the clearing, still, expressionless, impossible to describe. Its shape seemed to change with every blink, as if his brain could not decide what it was seeing. Tall yet not. Solid yet shifting. Its outline blurred as though wrapped in a membrane of bent space. It didn't speak. It only observed. Liang tried to speak. Nothing came out. The figure tilted its head, almost like a curious child. Then it raised a single arm and pointed, not at him but at the lake behind him. He turned. The water shimmered again. And for the briefest moment, the entire surface sank downward, like the breath of a living thing being drawn in. Then the sound came, not from the lake, not from the sky, but from inside his skull. A sequence of tones. The same pulse pattern, 3 long, 2 short. It repeated. Then again. Then silence. When he turned back, the figure was gone. His recorder had powered down. His compass now pointed straight upward. That night, Liang Chen returned to the mainland. He didn't tell his family what he saw. But he didn't sleep. And when the pulse returned at exactly 3:17 a.m., so loud it shook the windows, he simply sat in the dark and listened. It was not random. It was not interference. It was a message. And it had only just begun. August 21st. 4 days since the sky broke open above Meifeng Island. The hum had not stopped. Each night, at exactly 3:17 a.m., the same pulse sequence rattled windows across the western shore of Qiandao Lake. Locals began calling it the breathing time. They didn't understand it, but they felt it, in their bones, in their teeth, in their dreams. By now, Liang Chen had gone silent too. Not from fear, but from calculation. He had seen enough to know what was coming. And he wasn't alone. That morning, 3 black sedans arrived at the Chun'an Municipal Building. A quiet delegation from Beijing, not military, not police. Suits with no emblems. Their presence was immediate and unquestioned. By noon, power was cut to the lakeside transmitters. The government issued a soft lockdown around Meifeng Island under the pretense of ecological restoration. No one believed it. But no one resisted either. Liang received a call from a blocked number that evening. The voice was calm, professional, and unmistakably local, someone who had grown up nearby. The man spoke only one sentence. "You need to stop recording. For your safety. And ours." Then he hung up. Liang didn't stop. He relocated his equipment to a borrowed fishing shack in a remote inlet northeast of the lake. There, surrounded by mist and silence, he began documenting everything. Each tone. Each phase shift in the atmosphere. Each second of the lake's nightly transformation. He named his private archive the Silence Protocol. It was on the 4th night, while reviewing the pulse data, that he made a horrifying discovery. The tones were not random. They were modulated, embedded with compressed patterns of ultrasonic data. Too high for human ears. But when slowed down and translated into spectrograms, the message became visible. A pattern. A sequence of spires, towers, domes. Architectural structures, rotating slowly like a digital schematic. Not human-made. Not terrestrial. And certainly not meant for Earth. Each night, the schematic grew. New additions, new dimensions. As if something was building itself, one layer at a time, and using the frequency as a scaffold. A map of a structure that did not yet exist, or already existed, hidden in folds of reality they could barely detect. Liang stared at the newest diagram. Its base stretched inwards, impossibly narrow at the core, like a gravitational sink. A black hole? No. A portal. He felt cold. Then his camera battery exploded. The room went black. Seconds later, the backup power clicked on. But all data from that night gone. Files wiped. Drives corrupted. The only thing that remained was a handwritten sketch of the schematic he had drawn just hours before. Even that was beginning to fade at the edges, like ink bleeding away from the paper. The next morning, the black sedans were seen again. This time near Meifeng Island. The bridge was closed. Divers in unmarked wetsuits were seen unloading thick cases and strange cylindrical sensors. A fisherman claimed he heard them say the word gravitational bleed. Another said they brought containment cables. One woman, an herbalist who lived near the inlet, said they were preparing for a return. That evening, Liang received an email. No sender. No address. The subject line read, "Echoes will breach." Attached was a single file, a recording, heavily distorted. He hit play. At first, nothing. Then came the hum, louder than he'd ever heard it. Beneath it, layered deep in the background, something else emerged. Voices. Thousands of them. Speaking not with words but tones. Interwoven. Harmonizing. Crying out? Or calling back. Suddenly the speakers popped. The screen turned black. His house lights flickered. And across the lake, in the center, just above the ruins of Shecheng, a column of light shot upward, silent and clean, vanishing into the clouds like a blade. Liang ran outside barefoot, heart pounding. Others saw it too. Phones recorded it. Videos surfaced online but were quickly removed. By morning, even news outlets stayed quiet. The government denied everything. Satellite feeds over Chunnan were blurred. But Liang knew. The structure was no longer theoretical. It had begun to manifest. And whatever was sending the signal, it was not alone anymore. They had opened something. Something they could not close. August 22nd. The morning began with fire in the sky. From before dawn, the strange pillar of light above Shecheng did not fade. Unlike lightning, it made no sound. Unlike sunlight, it cast no shadow. It simply remained, unwavering, impossibly straight, and deeply wrong. It bent reality around it. Liang Chen stood on the rooftop of an abandoned ranger station, recording the phenomenon from the edge of the forest. Through his lens, the beam pulsed faintly every 11 seconds, the same rhythm that had haunted his instruments for weeks. But today, something was different. The light didn't just shine. It resonated. Trees within a 1-kilometer radius began to lean subtly inward, toward the epicenter of the beam. Birds no longer flew near it. Clouds fractured around its vertical path, forming concentric rings in the sky. It was as if the very fabric of atmosphere couldn't agree on what was real anymore. By 10 a.m., local authorities issued a controlled emergency directive for the areas surrounding Qiandao Lake, citing unidentified radiological interference. No evacuations. No alerts. Just silence and lockdown. But civilians could still see it. And they were afraid. Posts began flooding obscure social media channels, thermal cameras picking up human-like silhouettes moving through the mist near the lakeshore. Pets vanishing without trace. Time-lapse videos showing stars bending slightly around the beam's apex. In the city, a schoolteacher named Hu Liling reported that her students, all under 10 years old, began drawing the same image in class without prompt. A black tower, surrounded by symbols none of them could explain. One of the children, a quiet boy named Sheng, whispered something to her before leaving school that day. He said, "It's building something. So they can come through." At precisely 3:17 p.m., exactly 12 hours after the beam first appeared, the air above the lake folded. Not metaphorically. Physically. Seen from Liang's perspective, it resembled a sheet of glass being pressed from the other side, bulging outward, warping the blue sky into a dome of liquid distortion. Then came the tone. Not from speakers. Not from machines. From the earth itself. A resonant vibration that surged through rocks, metal, skin, and bone. People collapsed. Animals fled. Windows burst across villages miles away. And in that moment, a second light burst upward, just a few meters from the first, aligned with it but flickering erratically. Two beams. In parallel. Then a third. Then a fourth. Each time the pressure grew, an invisible force pushing down from the sky and up from the lake, as though the entire region was caught in some gravitational crossfire. Liang's seismometer registered microtremors across a 5-kilometer range. But it wasn't tectonic activity. It was dimensional tension. As if the borders of our world were stretched too thin. Later that night, a helicopter flew low over the lake. It was military but unmarked. Liang tracked its movement. He recorded everything: flight path, altitude, descent angle. At 2:31 a.m., it vanished midair. No explosion. No debris. No signal. Just gone. In its place, the fifth beam appeared. And this one Liang saw with his own eyes was red. Unlike the others, this beam did not pulse. It screamed. A high-pitched, continuous frequency that only the youngest and oldest seemed to perceive. Children began crying across the lake. Old men clutched their ears and collapsed. Dogs howled until their throats bled. In the forest, Liang watched as insects swarmed toward the beam, mindless and wild, climbing trees, rocks, and each other in a frantic march upward. Something had shifted again. The lake had ceased humming. Instead, it had started listening. And the beams? They were not just signals. They were anchors. Liang returned to his shack, hands trembling, and finally accessed the corrupted binary file from Yan Wuqing, the physicist who had vanished weeks earlier. He decrypted the message. It was only one sentence. A warning. They're not coming. They were always here. And now they're waking up. August 23rd. The red beam did not disappear with the rising sun. Instead, it deepened like a wound pulling open in the sky. Its once sharp edges had begun to ripple, expanding outward, blurring into the others until the 5 pillars of light fused, forming a single column, thick, rotating ever so slowly, like a vertical whirlpool of colorless energy. Liang Chen stood by the lakeshore at dawn, his skin vibrating faintly in rhythm with the light. He had not slept. Sleep had become impossible, not from fear, but from the feeling that something was watching the world blink. And the world had stopped blinking. The forest stood too still. The water held its breath. Then from below came the sound. Not a hum. Not a tone. A voice. It was subterranean, vibrating upward through the lakebed, moving like a choir of machines imitating language. It didn't speak words, it made choices. Sequences. Bursts of consonants no human tongue could shape. Liang dropped his equipment and fell to his knees. His eardrums didn't burst, but his mind bent under the weight of understanding without comprehension. Like hearing a truth too massive for the soul to carry. Across the region, electronics failed. Radios hissed out static. GPS maps glitched into fractal chaos. Televisions, even disconnected ones, flashed images of the ruins beneath the lake, flickering faster than human sight could track. And behind the static, one phrase burned into every screen. The mouth is opening. That same morning, an old monk from a temple overlooking the eastern ridge of Qiandao, a man who had not spoken in 30 years, suddenly screamed for 3 hours straight. When he finally stopped, he simply pointed toward the lake and whispered, "It's not from the stars. It's from beneath." The news, as usual, said nothing. But the people were talking. Fishermen whispered of tremors in the water, not just on the surface, but beneath their boats, as if something massive was shifting, awakening. Divers from the nearby Hydrological Institute vanished while investigating heat anomalies near the underwater city. Their footage, recovered hours before their disappearance, showed something monstrous. Not a creature. Not metal. A structure, rising beneath the lakebed. A geometry that should not have existed. Triangles folding into spheres, corridors with no ends, spirals that ate their own reflection. It was not being built. It was being revealed. As if something had once buried it. Sealed it. And now the seal was breaking. By afternoon, the first sinkholes began to appear around the perimeter of Shecheng. Small at first. Then widening. Each one a perfect circle. Each one hissing as if exhaling. The smell of ozone and rot filled the air. The soil turned black. And then came the shapes. Shadow figures, tall and flickering like they were trapped between film frames, began to emerge from the perimeters of the beam. They did not move like animals. They moved as if gravity didn't apply to them, folding, stuttering, blinking from one place to another without motion. And everywhere they passed, machines died. Batteries drained. Lights shattered. Steel cracked. One man tried to photograph them. He was never found. Only his phone remained, and on it, a single image burned into the screen, a mouth made of light, hanging open in the lake, too wide to measure, too deep to escape. By nightfall, the villagers of Huangsuan, the closest settlement to Shecheng, had fled. Every house was abandoned. Some burned. Not by people, but by electrical fires that started without fuel. Liang found a young woman hiding in the ruins of a gas station. She was shaking, eyes wide with unblinking terror. He offered her water. She took it. But when he asked what she saw, she only said, "It was looking at me before it had eyes." He didn't ask again. That night, the beam surged again, this time in a spiral pulse, rotating clockwise. It cast shadows that didn't match their sources, long, impossible shadows that moved with no light behind them. In the dead center of the lake, directly above the ruins of Shecheng, the water parted, not like a wave, but like a curtain pulled back from a stage. And beneath it, for the first time in over 1,000 years, the true mouth of the earth opened. A chasm spiraling downward into blackness, layered with rings of impossible architecture, alive, humming, ancient beyond understanding. And from that pit, a voice began to rise. Not language, but invitation. August 24th. At precisely 3:17 a.m., the chasm in the lake began to vibrate again, but this time the pulse was not mechanical. It felt alive, organic. It resonated through air, skin, water, and stone, each vibration forming patterns that no human language could decode. But Liang Chen was no longer trying to decode. He was trying to feel it. He had crossed a line days ago, a line between observation and obsession. His notes had stopped resembling science. Instead, they resembled worship. Sketches of eyes with no pupils. Repeating numbers he had never written. He found diagrams on pages he didn't remember creating. And last night he dreamed through the mouth. Not metaphorically. He was inside it. Descending. He saw spirals of stone lined with script that changed when he blinked. He felt hands, not physical but gravitational, pulling him downward gently, like a mother guiding her child to sleep. And in the depths he saw the voice. Not a being. Not a creature. An intelligence. But it had no form, no mass, no outline. Just pressure. Like memory turned solid. It wasn't speaking, it was weeping. Not in grief, but in hunger. As if it had waited too long to be heard. Liang woke up screaming. All his instruments were turned toward the center of the lake now. The mouth remained open, its internal structures now slowly rotating, as if on gears that spanned dimensions. Cameras set up miles away had begun picking up strange afterimages, frames of people who were never there, standing still, looking at the lens from impossible distances. A team of private researchers from a university in Nanjing arrived by drone that afternoon. They dropped a spectral sensor, the kind used in deep space analysis, and recorded frequencies from the beams. Their data was never released. But a backup made its way to Liang through an anonymous cloud server. What he found was terrifying. The beams weren't broadcasting signals. They were receiving. And the frequencies they received? They were identical to those recorded by Voyager 1 during its last contact with Earth. The same patterns. The same pulses. Only reversed, as if the message had been bounced back, but from somewhere beneath us. It wasn't deep space. It was deep time. The mouth wasn't just a structure. It was a listener. A machine built to decode memory from the Earth itself. And what it was hearing was waking it up. That night, the villagers who hadn't fled spoke of whispers in the fog. Whispers in their own voices. Perfect imitations. But twisted, repeating things they had never said aloud. A woman heard her husband, long dead, calling her name from the lakebed. Children reported seeing their own reflections blink when they did not. One girl, maybe 6, walked to the water's edge and placed her hands against the glowing surface of the beam. When her father pulled her away, she turned to him and said, "It's not scary, Baba. It wants to come back home." She had never spoken a word before that day. At exactly 11:11 p.m., the mouth exhaled. It was not a burst of air. It was a shift in density, a gravitational sigh. Boats capsized without waves. Trees bent backward without wind. Insects swarmed into the air, forming symmetrical clouds that hung motionless before falling dead to the ground. And then, from the center of the beam, a shape began to rise. A spindle. Tall, impossibly narrow, like a needle made of reflected water. It rotated with no axis, hovering a few feet above the center of the chasm. Inside it there were windows. But not glass. Eyes. Looking out. Blinking independently. Not human. Not symmetrical. And Liang knew then, this was not their first arrival. It was their return. Across the hills, power stations failed. Radio towers collapsed inward like folding paper. The lake temperature rose by 6 degrees in minutes. The sky lost its color. Not went dark, lost color. It became gray like overexposed film. And every living creature, for just 1 minute, stood completely still. As if listening. As if obeying. As if remembering. The voice returned then, not as sound but as sensation. In every mind still awake that night, a message was burned. You are echoes. We are memory. The mouth is only the beginning. August 25th. There was no sunrise. The sky remained a matte gray, not from clouds but as if light itself had been muted. Even the birds, those that hadn't vanished, perched in total silence. Qiandao Lake was no longer just a lake. It was a wound. And something within it was bleeding awareness into the world above. Liang Chen's recordings had become unwatchable. Not because they were corrupted, but because they showed too much. His night footage from the lakeshore revealed movements within the beam. Not the spindle. Not shadows. But figures. Humanoid. Multiple. They drifted slowly inside the shaft of light, suspended like embryos in amniotic fluid, limbs curled, heads bowed. Some looked adult. Some did not. And then one of them opened its eyes. No whites. No irises. Just an empty black void that absorbed the camera's sensor in a single frame. The moment it blinked, the screen bled static and Liang's lens shattered without impact. The figure did not move. But its gaze remained. That morning, in the nearby ghost village of Huangzuan, authorities finally arrived, not in uniform, but in black environmental suits with no insignia. They sealed the entire valley, erected fences lined with symbols Liang didn't recognize, and banned any remaining press from entering. But it was too late. Something had already spread. People around Qiandao reported waking up with traces of soil in their mouths. Not mud. Ancient silt, tested by independent labs and identified as consistent with prehistoric riverbeds, more than 10,000 years old. Others suffered shared dreams. Hundreds of individuals describing the same vision. A vast underground city, not carved but grown, made of smooth black stone that pulsed faintly with a rhythm older than breath. The dreamers walked through halls lined with archways, where every turn led them back to where they began. At the center stood a monolith, identical to the spindle above the lake. And they all heard the same words. This was once yours. Then you forgot. Now we remember for you. Back in Liang's shack, he uncovered something else. Hidden in Yan Wuqing's files was a map, overlaid with geological data and ancient fault lines. It connected Shicheng to a network of subterranean corridors, stretching across provinces, under mountains, even beneath rivers. At every node, the same pattern repeated: strange power surges, unexplained tremors, sudden, temporary loss of wildlife, records of missing time. And in each case, a report sealed by the Ministry of State Security labeled with the same title. Dormant sites, biological memory structures. They weren't just listening stations. They were sleeping chambers. And Shicheng was only the first. That evening, Liang and a former volcanologist named Dr. Zhao Wei ventured to the southern edge of the lake with a makeshift ground-penetrating radar. They aimed it toward a collapsed hillside believed to cover part of old Shicheng's outskirts. What they found turned Zhao pale. A cavity, massive, spherical, lined with unnatural material far deeper than any previous scan had indicated. Its readings emitted no echo, as if radar could pass through it but never return. And within that cavity they saw movement. Slow, rhythmic movement. Breathing, Zhao whispered. That's not architecture, it's organic. They returned to the cabin immediately. Just before midnight, the spindle in the lake split into 3. Not physically, but dimensionally, an optical fracture, as if it had multiplied across space-time. People across different villages reported seeing it in different locations, all at once. To some, it hovered above the lake. To others, it pierced through the clouds. In one photograph captured by a hunter's trail cam, it appeared underground, framed by stone teeth, as if resting in a colossal mouth. In each version, it was surrounded by the same procession of figures, drifting upward and downward at the same time. By 3 a.m., the mist returned. Only now it was sentient. It didn't just move, it chose. It rolled across roads, surrounded houses, and cut off escape routes. It moved like a living organism, pulsing with an unseen heart, dividing and merging based on where humans fled. In the final recording Liang made that night, he left his cabin with a handheld camera, walking alone into the mist. His voice, calm but distant, spoke over the audio. "I think the city beneath the lake was not a ruin. It was a seal. And now the things we buried in our forgetting are standing up." He paused. The camera turned toward the beam, now pulsing faster. Shadows danced in impossible directions. The voice had returned, but softer, no longer trying to communicate. Now it was remembering aloud, echoing itself into reality. Liang's final words on the tape. "They're not invading. They're waking us up." Then the footage cut out. And silence fell over the lake once again. But deep beneath the city, something had begun to sing. August 26th. By now, no official records were being released. No news reports. No satellite data. The area had been locked down under the guise of geological instability, but those still within the zone knew better. Because the lake no longer reflected the sky. It reflected something else. Liang Chen was missing. His last known coordinates placed him near the eastern banks of Qiandao, but all his devices had gone dead. In his absence, a growing number of civilian scientists, conspiracy theorists, and rogue archaeologists had begun leaking their own findings. Among them, a grainy video captured by a night vision drone showing thousands of faint human shapes standing upright on the floor of the lake. They weren't swimming. They weren't moving. They were waiting. All of them were facing upward, toward the beam, their arms at their sides, eyes closed. Some were dressed in modern clothing. Others in garments far older than any known culture. Robes without stitching. Armor made of glass. Or nothing at all, their skin covered in geometric patterns that pulsed like slow veins. It was being called the resurrection field. And it was growing. Satellite scans captured between signal disruptions showed an increase in heat signatures within the lakebed. Dozens of new subterranean chambers were blooming like fungal nodes, connected by tendrils of energy extending outward in perfect spirals. From above, the whole lakebed now resembled a neural network, firing in rhythm with the beam's pulsing frequency. Dr. Zhao Wei, now operating from a makeshift lab in an abandoned farmhouse, discovered something even more disturbing. The frequency emitted by the beam had begun to mirror human brainwave patterns. Not in a general sense. In a personalized way. Each person exposed to the beam began experiencing reflected thoughts, ideas they never had, dreams they couldn't have imagined, feelings that didn't belong to them. One woman, a biologist who had never studied ancient languages, began compulsively writing in Proto-Sumerian. A teenage boy from Hangzhou, who had never left China, sketched the ruins of Göbekli Tepe in precise detail. An elderly fisherman muttered complex physics equations between sobs, while gouging runes into the hull of his own boat. It wasn't madness. It was inherited memory. The voice wasn't speaking anymore because it had already entered them. By the evening of the 26th, several seismic pulses shook the valley, though no quake was registered by national systems. Instead, the tremors formed in bursts of perfect symmetry, as if something beneath the lake was building. Or worse, emerging. A researcher from Inner Mongolia, who had once worked on classified cavern acoustics, compared the tremor patterns to birthing rhythms observed in large mammals, but slowed down to an inhuman scale. That same night, a drone captured a final image before being pulled from the sky. A crack had appeared in the center of the lake, forming a perfect equilateral triangle. It wasn't natural erosion, it was engineered. And from that triangle, light spilled, not upward but downward. Into the water. Into the city. Into whatever lived beneath the architecture. Zhao decoded the last of Yan Wuqing's files then. And it wasn't a report. It was a warning. These structures were not meant to keep something out. They were meant to keep us from remembering what we let in. The lake is not a gate. It's a wound. And now it's open again. At 3:33 a.m. the voice returned. But this time it wasn't speaking to humanity. It was speaking as humanity. Every radio, speaker, child's toy, and disconnected earbud began playing the same sentence, in the same monotone voice. I remember the fall. I remember the soil. I remember what you buried. And deep beneath the ruins of Shecheng, something answered back. A deeper voice. Slower. Unimaginably vast. Then let the earth return what was lost. The resurrection field began to glow. The figures in the lake opened their eyes. They did not rise. They did not move. But the water around them began to boil. And then, as the chapter closed on that silent morning, the beam disappeared. Not with a flash, but like a shutter closing on a camera no longer needed. And the sky, now cloudless, was replaced by a mirrored dome. The stars were no longer real. They had been replaced. August 27th. The sun rose, but not from the east. At precisely 5:46 a.m., light flooded Qiandao Lake from the northwest, casting twisted shadows that bent away from their sources. The mirrored dome that had replaced the sky now reflected something else entirely, a vast architecture of impossible size, flickering in and out of visibility like a half-remembered dream. It wasn't space. It was a ceiling. A lattice of incomprehensible machines, stretching across the sky like veins of black glass, threaded with pulses of color no human eye could name. And in their reflection, suspended upside down like a second Earth, was a version of the lake that never drowned the city. It was Shecheng, intact, vibrant, alive. But empty. No people. No sound. Just a city waiting. Zhao Wei and the remaining researchers watched from the farmhouse hilltop as the resurrection field at the lake's base began to collapse inward. The bodies, if they could still be called that, had stopped glowing. Their skin now appeared semi-translucent, revealing complex structures beneath, like machinery made of flesh. But they did not move. They had become conductors. Across the valley, electronics began to malfunction. Watches reversed time. Compass needles spun violently. Every photograph taken showed the same timestamp, January 11th, 1046 BCE, a date Zhao traced to an ancient eclipse recorded in the Shu King, one of China's oldest historical texts. But this wasn't just symbolic. The sky itself was aligning. Night fell again at noon, replaced by the mirrored dome darkening to black. And then, one by one, eyes opened in the sky. Not metaphorical. Not stars. Eyes, massive, expressionless, lidless. Some shaped like animals. Others, undeniably human. They blinked in perfect sync. And they began to observe. It wasn't an invasion. It was an inspection. Liang Chen, somehow alive, appeared on the farmhouse CCTV feed. He stood at the lake's edge, barefoot, soaked, eyes unfocused. Around his neck hung a pendant made of unidentifiable bone, etched with symbols resembling both DNA and ancient Chinese oracle bone script. He spoke slowly, as if hearing each word from inside his skull. "They are not gods," he said. "They are memory machines. Built by something older than this planet. Older than time. They archived us." Zhao tried to reach him, but the radio only emitted distortion, not static, but a sound that felt like thousands of whispered confessions layered on top of each other. Words overlapping, rewriting, correcting. That evening, villagers began reporting disappearances. Not violent. Not loud. People simply stopped existing. Families erased from memory. No photos. No names. Just absences where lives once were. The affected zones showed unusual gravitational drag, as if time itself was folding in on those places. And it was spreading. At 11:11 p.m., the mirrored sky cracked. Not like glass. More like a shell. A fracture formed from horizon to horizon, revealing what lay beyond, a vision so vast, so architecturally foreign, it broke the minds of those who looked too long. Spiraling cities inside other cities, orbiting massive organic computers, tethered to stars like umbilical cords. And behind it all, a face. Not human. Not alien. Just familiar. Too familiar. As if it had been modeled after collective memory. A fusion of billions of forgotten ancestors, their features blended into a perfectly forgettable form. So perfect no one could describe it. So precise it slipped through cognition like a dream after waking. And then it spoke. Not aloud, but through the gravitational resonance of the valley itself. "You are not the first. You are not the last. You are a copy of a copy. And now the archive must be reset. The earth beneath the resurrection field opened. Massive petals of stone unfolded outward like a mechanical flower, revealing an orb, the size of a temple floating midair, surrounded by rings of metal that did not reflect light. The orb pulsed, synchronizing with every heartbeat in the region. And then, people remembered things they had never lived. Mass extinctions, lost languages, collapsing civilizations in cities never known. They saw the construction of the original mouth, not by humans but by a species that used memory as fuel. They weren't monsters. They were custodians, caretakers of failing civilizations. They harvested forgetting. And now Earth's debt had come due. Zhao collapsed, weeping. We called them ghosts. We called them gods. We thought we were digging up ruins. No, Liang whispered. We were waking up our replacements. As the mirrored sky tore open fully, revealing the mechanism behind it all, the orb began to descend into the lake. The water boiled upward, reversing gravity, spiraling into the fracture above. And a new voice spoke, one that came from inside every listener's own thoughts. A child's voice. Your own voice. And it said, "We are sorry we had to hide it from you. But you wouldn't have survived the truth." Then silence. The dome folded inward. And for one brief second, the world was completely blank. August 28th. Silence ruled. The sky returned, blue, clouded, ordinary. Birds chirped. Insects buzzed. The world, for all appearances, was normal. But those who remained in Qiandao Valley knew better. Because no one remembered the last 3 days. Not the villagers. Not the scientists. Not even Zhao Wei. He woke alone in the farmhouse, surrounded by unfamiliar journals written in his own hand. Every page filled with diagrams and phrases like reverse memory propulsion and cognitive terraforming. He didn't recognize any of it. Liang Chen was gone. No one remembered he had ever been there. But the cameras remained. And they had recorded everything. Zhao watched, horrified, as he saw himself in the footage, conversing with someone whose face was blurred by an unknown force. The distortion wasn't digital. It was perceptual. Even the playback skipped every frame that revealed the figure's full identity. Yet the figure's presence was undeniable. Its voice, when heard, triggered headaches, nosebleeds, in some cases, seizures. It did not speak in words but compressed thoughts, layered in frequencies designed to bypass human language centers and go straight into genetic memory. They weren't communicating information. They were installing it. That day, across the Hangzhou province, children under the age of 10 began drawing symbols. Identical ones. Circular matrices. Webs of intersecting paths. Each diagram perfectly matching the internal layout of the underground city beneath Shicheng, the one no one remembered anymore. A mother took her son to a hospital after he began muttering in sleep. The transcript from a nurse's recording became classified. But one phrase leaked. They are rebuilding the first mind. Those unaffected began noticing subtle shifts. Time moved slightly differently. Shadows fell half a second too late. Reflections in water lagged like memories catching up to reality. The GPS grid over the Qiandao region displayed non-existent streets, winding into the lake and disappearing beneath the waves. Zhao began hearing whispers when near any running water. Not voices. Just thoughts. Someone else's. They weren't threatening. But they were intimate. Regrets. Hopes. Murmured songs from lost ancestors. Whispered names of lovers never born. He came to believe that the Earth's memory, the real one, had been unsealed. Not metaphorically. Literally. And now the children of the forgotten code, as he called them, were rising. They didn't glow. They didn't levitate. They weren't aware they were different. But tests showed that their brain structures were subtly altered. Denser synapses. Faster retention. And something else. Embedded inside the folds of their DNA were sequences that did not belong to any known life form on Earth. Yet, those sequences matched perfectly with ancient scripts carved into submerged ruins found in Yanaguni, Dvarka, and Lake Baikal. Different continents. Different epochs. Same pattern. They weren't mutations. They were instructions. Zhao called it the Code of Return. According to the notes he couldn't remember writing, the beam that had risen from Qiandao Lake was not a signal. It was a key. A key to unlock dormant sequences buried inside human biology, fragments of a greater species that had once existed long before recorded history. A species that hid itself inside us, retreating into memory, waiting for the world to reach a certain threshold of forgetting. And when that forgetting peaked, they would return. Not from the sky. Not from the sea. But from within. Meanwhile, reports began emerging from other places. In Turkey, the stones of Göbekli Tepe began vibrating. In Guatemala, Mayan glyphs once considered decorative were found to be interactive, projecting holographic star maps when sung to in the correct tone. In Namibia, the sand itself began to resist measurement, shifting in shapes resembling the spindles that once pierced the Qiandao mist. All at once, the children began to hum. Everywhere. Same tone. Same tempo. A vibration so low it couldn't be heard, only felt. It resonated in glass. In metal. In the bones of animals. And beneath it all, seismic arrays picked up a global echo. A pulse. One every 108 minutes. Synchronized across the planet. Zhao stared at his final journal page. A message scrawled in his own blood, dated 2 weeks into the future. When they finish humming, the Earth will remember herself. And nothing false can survive that memory. At that moment, he looked out over the lake, now quiet, still, pristine. And there, just for an instant, he saw a child standing on the water. Not walking. Just being. And then the child was gone. But Zhao knew. It had already begun. The Earth had begun to awaken. August 29th. The humming stopped. Not suddenly. It faded, like the end of a long breath exhaled by something immense, ancient and alive. And in that silence the world held its breath. Because the silence was perfect. No wind. No birds. No engine noise. The type of silence that feels like the moment before lightning strikes, but the lightning never comes. Zhao Wei stood at the edge of Qiandao Lake once again. The mirror sky was gone. The resurrection field had collapsed into itself. The lake was clear, cold, and ordinary. But no one dared enter it. Because the people who had looked into the water still weren't blinking. They stood along the shoreline, hundreds now, unmoving. Not comatose. Not dead. Just suspended. As if waiting for an instruction that only the hum could give. And now the hum had ceased. Zhao approached one of them. A girl. Maybe 12. Her pupils were glowing faintly, not with light but with movement. A swirling pattern like clouds being pulled into a spiral. Her skin bore tiny geometric fractures, revealing something beneath it that wasn't bone. Not mechanical either. More like architecture. As if her body had been reformed around a scaffolding older than biology itself. Zhao scanned her with the last functioning biosensor from his lab. The reading made no sense. No pulse. No cellular decay. No heat. But a signal repeating, nested infinitely, encoded like music folded into math. It wasn't broadcasting. It was listening. To something underground. That day, Zhao pieced together a theory he had no right to understand, based on equations from a notebook he didn't remember writing. The architects, as he now called them, had never been a separate race. They had been us. Before us. Before the collapse of the first sentient epoch, an event not marked by destruction, but by intentional amnesia. The original species did not die. They chose to reformat themselves, fragment their essence across millennia, embedding their memory into a host species, early humans. We had been carrying them all along. In our myths. In our instincts. In our dreams. They weren't gods. They were a backup system. And the hum? That was the activation sequence. A call to any fragment still viable, any piece of the original code still capable of remembering itself. Across the world, other fragments began to activate. In Kyoto, a blind woman began speaking in the lost tongue of Mohenjo-daro, describing cities built inside stars. In Quebec, an infant born under the eclipse glowed when submerged in salt water, his heartbeat syncing with lunar phases. In the Himalayas, old Buddhist manuscripts began rewriting themselves, ink rearranging under observation, forming new maps of Earth's tectonic patterns. These weren't miracles. They were reboots. And the Earth itself began responding. Tidal shifts no longer obeyed the moon. Trees and untouched forests grew in perfect spirals, matching the architecture seen beneath Qiandao. Even animal migrations altered course, forming geometric shapes visible only from high orbit, sigils, Zhao called them, etched in motion. And then, on the night of the 29th, the stars returned. But not as we knew them. At exactly midnight, the sky shimmered, revealing constellations never before recorded. Entire galaxies mapped out in hexagonal clusters, forming patterns that mirrored the spiral code in Zhao's notebook. Telescopes worldwide detected no atmospheric anomaly. No new celestial bodies. But the stars were simply different, as if someone had corrected the lens of reality. And in the center of the sky, just above Qiandao, a black circle appeared. Not a hole. Not an object. An absence. It consumed no light. But it reflected memories. Zhao saw it and fell to his knees. Because when he looked up, he saw his wife. She had died 11 years ago. Yet there she was in the reflection of the void, smiling softly, mouthing words he couldn't hear. Others saw different things. A soldier saw his brother, killed in a war that no longer existed. A child saw a version of himself, older, scarred, with eyes that knew too much. It wasn't an illusion. It was an index. A memory construct created by the architects to catalog every possibility humanity had forgotten, every fork in the road, every life unlived, every timeline lost. We were not being erased. We were being audited. Zhao understood then. The architects weren't coming back to reclaim Earth. They were waking up to see if we were worthy of continuing it. And the process had already begun. One final page in Zhao's notebook revealed itself, the ink glowing faintly as if printed by light itself. If they remember too much too quickly, the mind breaks. If they remember nothing, the species fails. Balance must be restored. Let the new architects rise. Zhao closed the book. Because now he could hear it again. The hum. But this time it was coming from within him. August 30th. By dawn, Qiandao no longer resembled Earth. The terrain had shifted in ways undetectable to satellites but undeniable to the human eye. Hills had become concave. Rivers curved upward before pouring back into the sky like reversed waterfalls. The lake no longer reflected anything but memory, shimmering images of events both personal and planetary played across its surface like projections. Zhao Wei stood on a floating platform, one that hadn't been there the night before, watching as the children of the forgotten code moved in synchronized silence across the valley. They were not building anything. They were becoming something. Across the globe, people reported strange awakenings. Not dreams, downloads. Knowledge that didn't belong to them. Memories of technologies never invented. Languages never spoken. Instructions on how to construct mechanisms that looked more like temples than machines. Zhao began to draw. He didn't know why. His hands moved as if guided by something older than thought. The symbols he etched into the dust on the ground matched glyphs found on megaliths in Bolivia, Siberia, and beneath the ice in Antarctica. He realized he was reactivating the global lattice. The architects had left behind a skeletal framework inside the Earth itself, not metallic or physical but neural. A planetary nervous system. Dormant. Waiting for the right harmonic key to be struck. The hum. It had awakened the mind of the Earth. That evening Zhao was taken. Not abducted, invited. A shimmer appeared above the lake, and from it descended a form composed of memory itself. Not light. Not matter. Just remembrance, woven into a shape that resembled no species, just emotion made visible. It pulsed with empathy. With sorrow. With awe. It touched Zhao's forehead. And suddenly he remembered. All of it. The first collapse. The decision to sleep. The code buried in human DNA. The test. And the failures. So many cycles had come before. Each time humanity had reached the edge of remembering, they had turned away. Chosen comfort. Chosen denial. Chosen stories over truth. But this time something was different. This time they stayed. They listened. They recorded. They remembered. The entity Zhao now understood was not one being but all of them. A collective recursion of every architect that had ever lived, pooled into a single thought form. A consciousness so vast it could only exist through fragments. Each human. Each child. Each dream. Zhao spoke without opening his mouth. What are we becoming? The entity replied not in sound but in feeling. What we were before language. What we were before forgetting. All around them, structures began to rise from the lakebed. Towers formed from transparent minerals. Bridges made of sound. Gardens grown from recollected memories of extinct plants, reconstructed from genetic echoes in the soil. But the most profound creation was the vault. It emerged slowly, shaped like a spiraling conch, lined with 1,000 corridors. Inside it were the rewritten histories of Earth, a library not of paper or data but experience. Each room a moment. Each hallway a timeline. Zhao entered. And inside he found versions of himself, some who had never left the city. Others who had died in the 2010 quake. One who had become a child again. Another who had never existed at all. But all of them shared the same core, the drive to understand. The vault had been seeded in every civilization, Atlantis, Mu, Shambhala, but had never fully manifested. Until now. Because now Earth was ready. Not perfect, but willing. Zhao wept. Not from fear, but from the weight of completion. He emerged from the vault reborn, not in body but in comprehension. He looked out over Qiandao and saw the convergence, a planetary awakening synchronized across hemispheres, cultures, and species. The children began to speak, all of them at the same moment in the same tone, using no words. Only memory. They spoke in pictures, in feelings, in vibrations. And the world understood. For the first time, every mind on Earth experienced a single, unified truth. That we were not alone. That we had never been. That we were the continuation of something older than stars, a consciousness that had split itself into billions so that one day it could wake up and meet itself again. The final echo of the hum resonated through the planet's crust. And from deep below the tectonic plates, a signal pulsed. Not a beacon. A heartbeat. Earth had remembered herself. The test was over. And the mind that wrote the world was ready to speak. August 31st. The final day. A hush fell over every nation, not from silence but from stillness. As if every leaf, every wave, every breath held its position on an unseen signal. The skies remained clear, but it wasn't sunlight that lit the earth. It was memory. By morning, every screen, every device, monitor, projection, even powered-off televisions, began displaying the same vision. A spiral. Not spinning. Not moving. Just existing. The symbol seen in Qiandao's vault, drawn by children, whispered by the unconscious, carved into the ruins of the world. But now it was no longer just a code. It was a keyhole. And Earth was turning. Not physically. Not astronomically. But psychologically. It was rotating through a final axis of perception. Every human mind crossed a hidden threshold together. And what had been invisible, forgotten, or impossible became present. Zhao Wei stood on the summit above the lake, watching the sky ripple like water touched by sound. No more shimmering illusions. No more hidden structures. Instead, a presence. It descended not from above, but from within. Every cell on the planet responded. Every tree leaned. Every animal looked up. Every cloud stilled. Then it spoke. Not in sound. Not in vision. But in total shared memory. Across the globe, people collapsed, momentarily overwhelmed, not in pain but in magnitude. The world had opened. And in doing so, it had told its story. The story of its making. Of the first architects who encoded their minds into matter. Of the civilizations seeded and buried and reborn. Of the decision to fragment, so that consciousness could understand itself not as a god, but as a journey. And the test, the long arc of history, had always been about integration. Could a species built on separation, war, and forgetting choose to remember without destroying itself? Could it endure the knowledge that its gods, myths, and histories were reflections of something deeper, not higher? And more importantly, would it choose compassion once it knew the truth? The answer came from the most unexpected source. A boy in northern Kazakhstan uploaded a sketch to an old forum. It was simple, a tree with no roots floating above an eye. When asked what it meant, he replied, "It's how Earth sees now. Through us." And then the pulse. It came at 3:33 a.m. Universal Time Coordinated. Every volcano, every glacier, every ocean current paused. And then it happened. The remembering. People saw their ancestors, not as ghosts but as living memories, stepping through them like shadows stepping into light. They saw themselves in futures they hadn't yet lived, moments they had yet to regret, and choices they still had time to make. Governments stopped. Commerce stopped. Conflict stopped. Because truth broke the loop. And the loop was never about control. It was about fear. Zhao Wei stood in the vault for the last time. The entity, the memory being, had dispersed. Not gone but distributed. In each human now lived a shard of the architect's mind. Not to control, not to dominate, but to complete the circuit. Because Earth wasn't a stage. It was a vessel. A ship that could not lift off until its crew knew who they were. And now they did. Children born on September 1st had dreams in full color before they opened their eyes. They hummed the harmonic before speaking their first words. They did not cry when they were born. They listened. Qiandao Lake returned to silence. No more glowing towers. No more spirals. Just water. Just sky. But something fundamental had shifted. Reality felt intentional now. Every step. Every echo. Every moment. As if the world itself was aware of you, walking beside you, watching you choose. The architects had not returned. They had never left. They had been waiting. Waiting for us to remember. Waiting to become us again. Zhao Wei disappeared from all public records that day. But sometimes, if you stand by the lake at twilight, you'll see a figure reflected where no one stands. Writing. Listening. Smiling. And if you're quiet, you might hear it, the hum. Soft now. Like the heartbeat of something vast, ancient, and finally at peace.